Tonight, we have got something special for you. Not one horror story, but two. In tonight's first episode, we're heading to the edge of Singapore's coastline, where something ancient and sorrowful still lingers just beyond the waves. This story takes place at East Coast Park. By day, it's all sunshine, bike trails, and sizzling barbecues. But after midnight, locals say the sea brings something else ashore. During the Hungry Ghost Festival, the shoreline turns eerie. Joggers slow down, fishermen pack up early, and some swear they've seen her, barefoot, soaked, and asking the same question in a voice barely above a whisper. "Have you seen my child?" People say she disappears before you can answer. Others say she waits to see if you do. Let's dive in. It started with a dare. Jun, a 21-year-old film student from NG An Polytechnic, had been working on a short documentary about urban legends in Singapore. He'd already covered the Yellow Tower, the Bukit Brown Cemetery, even a haunted lift in Tampines. But none of those stories had stuck with him the way this one had. The woman at East Coast Park. So, one evening in late August, with the 7th lunar month in full swing, Jun packed his camera, a power bank, and a cheap camping mat. His plan was simple. Spend the night by the beach, film whatever he could, and maybe, just maybe, catch something that would make his final year project unforgettable. He set up near a cluster of benches close to the breakwater. Families had packed up hours ago. The barbecues were cold. The air was thick with salt and silence, except for the occasional rustle of palm trees. Jun tried to stay practical. Legends were legends, after all. But the moment the clock passed midnight, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't cold, not exactly, but his skin prickled. He noticed it first in the water, small, irregular ripples as if someone had just walked out of the sea. He turned on his camera instinctively, heart starting to race. In the distance, someone was walking barefoot across the sand. Jun adjusted his lens, squinting through the dark. The figure was pale, drenched, alone. And then, as if sensing his gaze, she stopped and turned. Jun kept his camera trained on the woman, adjusting the focus, trying to steady his breathing. But the longer he looked, the more the lens seemed to resist her shape, like she was out of sync with the world around her. The autofocus kept twitching, as if unsure whether she was really there. Then came the voice, faint, soft, and carried by the wind. "Have you seen my child?" Jun froze. He hadn't seen her lips move, but the voice felt close, too close. He spun around instinctively, half expecting someone to be right behind him. No one. When he turned back to the beach, the woman was gone. The camera was still rolling, catching nothing but empty shoreline. He replayed the footage, scrubbing back 10 seconds, then 20. No woman, not even a flicker. But he had seen her, clear as day. And then, a chill. Not from the sea breeze, but from the way everything suddenly went still. No rustling trees, no passing cyclists, just static silence. Jun stood up and scanned the area. That's when he noticed something odd. A pair of wet footprints on the pavement, leading away from the beach and curving directly behind the bench where he'd been sitting. He hadn't heard anyone approach. The footprints ended at a lamppost, which was flickering faintly now, like a dying pulse. Just above it, tangled in the branches, hung a red paper lantern, torn, old, and definitely not part of any modern park decoration. Jun didn't remember seeing it earlier, but now it was swaying gently. And beneath it, something else was moving. Something small, something crawling. Jun backed away from the bench, heart thudding. His camera hung uselessly around his neck, lens fogged and battery flickering like it couldn't keep up. He tried to make sense of the thing beneath the lantern. At first he thought it was a crab, then a rat. But as it moved into the glow of the broken lamp, he saw it was a tiny shoe. Soaked, caked with sand. A child's shoe? He didn't remember seeing any kids around all evening. He knelt down, slowly, reaching for it. But just before his fingers touched the fabric, something else appeared. A reflection. In the puddle beneath the shoe, He saw a woman's face. Long black hair clinging to her cheeks. Hollow eyes staring back at him. He spun around, nothing there. But the puddle still held her gaze. Jun stumbled back, breathing fast, suddenly aware of how alone he was. But not alone. Not really. A distant hum broke the silence. Not the sound of traffic, but something old. Something off-key. Like someone singing a lullaby into a broken speaker. It was coming from deeper in the park. Still gripping his camera, Jun followed the sound, half pulled by curiosity, half driven by something heavier, like he wasn't fully in control anymore. He walked past the food stalls, now dark and shuttered, past the playground, the swings creaking without wind, past the barbecue pits, where the ashes of the night's laughter still lingered. And then he wasn't alone anymore. A man in a security vest stood by one of the bicycle rental kiosks, smoking. His expression was blank until he saw Jun. Then it changed. Fast. "You filming tonight?" the guard asked, flicking ash. Jun nodded. "Just a documentary? Urban myths?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Then pack up and go. Now." "What did you—" "I'm not joking, boy," the guard snapped. "It's the 7th month. Don't look for her." Jun hesitated. "You mean the woman?" The man didn't answer. He just stepped forward, lowered his voice. "Some things look human. Some things remember being human. That's not the same thing." Jun felt his skin crawl. "She'll ask you a question," the man added. "Don't answer, no matter what." "Why?" But the guard didn't respond. He turned and walked off, tossing the cigarette into the sand without another word. Jun stood there, the night pressing down on him, the sea whispering just beyond the trees. Behind him, footsteps. Soft, wet, barefoot. Jun turned, slowly. No one was there, but the footprints were, fresh ones, leading directly toward him and stopping just a few feet away. The sand beneath them still glistening, still sinking, as if whoever made them had just stepped back into the shadows. He lifted his camera again, almost by reflex. The screen was glitching, lines streaking across the display, audio warping into low static. But he kept recording. Then the temperature dropped. Not a breeze, not the night air. A cold that felt internal, like his bones were remembering winter. The lullaby began again. Closer. This time, it was clearer. A woman's voice, soft and trembling, singing in Hokkien. Words he didn't understand, but tone soaked in grief. And then she appeared. Not in the distance, not across the path, but beside him, soaked hair trailing across her face, a pale dress clinging to her like seaweed, eyes that didn't just look through him, they seemed to mourn him. "Have you seen my child?" Her voice was no louder than a breath, but it rang in his ears like a scream. Jun's mouth went dry, every instinct screamed to run, but his legs locked. "Please," she whispered again, closer now. "He was just here." She reached out, not quickly, not threatening, but gently, as if touching memory. And suddenly, Jun wasn't at East Coast Park anymore. He was underwater. The world was blue, muffled, distant. He was sinking. And someone was holding his hand. Small, cold. A child. The world snapped back like a rubber band. Jun gasped, coughing hard, stumbling backward onto the sand. His clothes were dry, but he could taste salt on his tongue. The woman was gone. Only the footprints remained. 2 sets now, one large, one small. The camera had shut off entirely, battery dead. That's when he noticed something tucked beneath the bench where he'd first set up earlier that night. A folded newspaper, damp and yellowed. He picked it up. The date was from 20 years ago. "Mother and son drown in East Coast tragedy," the headline read. He scanned the article, heart racing. A woman, unnamed, had been reported missing with her 5-year-old son. Witnesses said she was last seen calling for him near the rocks, refusing to leave even as the tide pulled in. Neither body was recovered. Locals began leaving offerings in the area each Hungry Ghost festival: lanterns, shoes, toys, even red thread to guide spirits home. June looked up. That torn lantern, above the bench, the tiny shoe. They weren't random. They were offerings. But who had left them this year? As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, etched faintly into the wet sand. A name. It matched the byline on the newspaper article. It wasn't just a story. She had been real, and she was still searching. June didn't wait. He grabbed his gear, barely remembering to sling the dead camera over his shoulder. The air felt heavier now, like the park itself was watching. He walked fast, then faster, until the trees thinned and the road came into view. Cars still passed occasionally. Life went on, but something about him had changed. As he reached the parking lot, he stopped to catch his breath. His reflection stared back from the window of a parked van, pale, shaken, and not alone. Behind him, in the glass, stood a figure. A woman, barefoot, soaked. She didn't move, didn't speak. June turned around. Nothing. Just empty air. The next day, he tried to upload the footage. Corrupted. Every file, every frame. The only thing that remained was a single still image burned into the SD card, an overexposed photo of the shoreline. And in the far left corner, almost too faint to see, a child's hand reaching up from the surf. To this day, June never returned to East Coast Park. Not even in daylight. Because some spirits don't want to be found. They want to bring you with them. I hope you enjoyed this story. Now let's go on to the next story. By the way, if you love these stories, please subscribe to our channel. It would support us very much. Thanks. Now, imagine you're alone on a nearly empty bus. It's past midnight. The city lights fade behind you. And just ahead, a darkness waits that doesn't feel entirely human. This next story takes us deep into Beijing, China, a place of temples, traffic, and, on one particular route, a bus that never made it to its final stop. It's known as Route 375. What started as an ordinary night ride to fragrant hills became one of the most terrifying urban legends in Chinese history. Because that night, two very pale passengers got on board. They didn't blink, they didn't speak. And by morning, the bus had vanished without a trace, except for the driver, who was found rambling about ghosts, or something even worse. It happened in the early hours of a cold November night in 1995. The last bus of the day was parked at the terminal in Beijing's Yuanmingyuan district, waiting to make its final run to the fragrant hills. Route 375. A quiet route. Mostly elderly passengers, night shift workers, the occasional student trying to save cab fare. No one ever expected anything unusual from it. The driver that night was a middle-aged man named Liu. Calm, routine-driven, the kind of person who had done this route so many times, he could drive it with his eyes closed. Riding with him was a female conductor. Back then, buses in Beijing often had an attendant to help with tickets and keep order. The bus pulled out around 11:40. The air was colder than usual, a dry, bone-deep chill. Only a few passengers climbed on at the first stops. A young couple whispering quietly. An old man with a limp. A factory worker in a stained jacket. Nothing strange, nothing worth remembering. But then, at a stop near the Nanwan Bridge, an area already known for its lack of lighting and old broken buildings, 3 people got on. 2 men, unnaturally pale, dressed in robes that looked several decades out of date. They didn't speak, they didn't look at anyone, they just walked to the back and sat down. The third was a woman, wrapped in layers of scarves, face almost entirely hidden. The conductor gave them a glance, hesitated, and then clipped their tickets without saying a word. And just like that, the bus continued on. But something had changed. At first, everything seemed normal. The road stretched on in silence, interrupted only by the occasional bump or flicker of a street lamp. Most passengers dozed off, lulled by the rhythm of the bus and the cold hum of the night. But the conductor couldn't shake an odd feeling. She kept glancing back at the 3 new passengers, especially the 2 men in robes. They hadn't moved. Not once. Not a word between them. Not even the sway of the bus seemed to affect them. They just sat there, completely still, as if they were carved out of wax. The woman next to them was worse. She was hunched over, arms tightly wrapped around her chest, face hidden in her scarf. But her breathing was strange, shallow, deliberate, like she was trying to mimic something she no longer remembered how to do. Then, about halfway through the route, the conductor noticed something else. The windows. They were fogging up from the outside. It wasn't raining. There was no mist in the air. And yet, one by one, each window was frosting over, like invisible hands were pressing against the glass. She wiped one with her sleeve and felt how warm the inside of the bus had become. Too warm. Oppressively warm. And yet, the cold air still crawled along the floor like a draft that had no source. She turned to the driver. "Something's off," she whispered. He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Then came a soft sound from the back. A whisper, followed by another, then a laugh. But when she turned around, the 3 passengers were still sitting perfectly still. Too still. The next 10 minutes passed in suffocating silence. The conductor kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting the 3 figures to disappear, or worse, move. But they never did. They just sat there. Pale faces barely visible under the flickering interior lights. Blank, hollow. The rest of the passengers were beginning to shift uncomfortably. The young couple whispered back and forth with worried glances toward the back. The old man clutched the metal bar in front of him like he was bracing for something. Even the factory worker looked up from his slouched seat, frowning as if he could sense something unspoken in the air. Then, as the bus rolled past a deserted intersection, the engine sputtered. Just for a second. A small cough, a flicker in the lights, a dip in momentum that made every passenger jolt forward. The driver tapped the dashboard, muttering something under his breath, and the bus recovered. But in that brief moment, something else changed. The clock at the front of the bus. It had reset. The glowing red digits now read 0000, midnight, but they'd left the terminal well before midnight. The conductor leaned toward the driver again. "Did you see that?" she asked. He nodded, lips tight. "Don't say anything. Just watch." And then came the cold. Not just a draft this time, but a wave. A blast of air that rolled down the aisle like it had force behind it. It made the windows ice over completely, sealing them in a thin sheet of frost. Passengers pulled their jackets tighter, shivering. The factory worker cursed under his breath. The conductor stood up to check the thermostat near the front, then stopped. There was something on the floor. Water. A trail of it, leading from the back of the bus. Not just a few drops, more like something had been dragged. Wet footprints, bare feet, slowly drying against the warm vinyl flooring. She followed the trail with her eyes all the way to the seat where the 2 pale men sat. Their robes were soaked, still dripping. And now their heads were tilted, not facing forward, but toward her. No blink, no breath, just 2 cold, dead stares locked onto hers. Before she could react, the bus screeched to a sudden halt. Everyone jolted. A figure had stepped into the road, forcing the driver to slam the brakes. It was a woman, middle-aged, dressed in layers of old winter clothes, hair wild, eyes wide. She ran up to the bus door and began banging on the glass, yelling something the conductor couldn't make out. The driver hesitated, then opened the door just enough to hear. "You have to get off!" the woman screamed. "Now! This bus is not what you think it is!" Behind her, the street was empty. No cars, no lights, just endless black road. The passengers stared in frozen confusion. Then the woman's expression changed. She looked past the conductor, past the passengers, straight to the back, and her face turned white. The woman outside didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, eyes wide, with a kind of horror that made the conductor's stomach twist. Then she stepped back and screamed one final word before running into the darkness. Dead. The bus doors slammed shut automatically. Without a word, the driver put his foot on the gas. The vehicle lurched forward. But something had changed. The lights overhead began to flicker more violently now, casting long, warped shadows across the aisle. The temperature dropped again, sharp enough to see their breath hang in the air. The conductor turned around slowly. The three passengers at the back were no longer seated. They were standing, right in the center of the aisle, faces still expressionless, robes soaked and clinging to their bodies. Their eyes were wrong, sunken, like they'd been underwater too long. Their skin looked stretched, pale blue, almost bloated. The old man gasped and pressed himself into his seat. The young woman began to cry quietly. The factory worker stood, fists clenched, backing away slowly. But the pale figures didn't advance. They just stood there, watching. Then, the woman who had sat beside them fell. Her scarf slipped loose as her body hit the floor, and what was underneath made the entire bus go silent. There was no face, only something shriveled, rotten, a waxy shell that looked more like a mask than skin. The conductor screamed, and the driver? He stood up, eyes wide and glassy, and pulled something out from under his seat. A bundle of incense sticks and a lighter. The driver didn't say a word as he lit the incense. His hands were shaking, but his movements were practiced, like this wasn't the first time. Thick curls of smoke rose into the air, filling the bus with a heavy, choking scent. Not sweet, not calming, something old, earthy, almost metallic. The kind of smell that clings to the back of your throat. The conductor stared at him. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer right away. Then finally, in a voice hoarse with fear, he said, "They're not alive. I've seen this before." He pointed toward the figures, now standing completely still again, unmoving in the haze of incense smoke. Sometimes they board the late buses. They look like passengers, but they're not. The incense keeps them confused, keeps them from noticing us. The pieces started clicking together. The freezing air, the soaked robes, the clock resetting to midnight, the frost on the windows. They weren't riding through Beijing anymore. They had crossed into something else. One by one, the passengers started to realize it too. Faces pale, breaths shallow. Some clutched charms or whispered prayers under their breath. The driver held up a second bundle of incense and handed it to the conductor. "Don't let the smoke go out," he said quietly. "Because once they know we're alive, they take us with them." The conductor clutched the incense like her life depended on it. Smoke coiled around her fingers as she backed away from the aisle, eyes never leaving the pale figures. But they didn't move. They just stood there, watching, waiting, as if some invisible line was keeping them in place. The bus rattled forward, headlights cutting through a fog that hadn't been there before. Outside, the city was gone. No buildings, no cars. Just black fields and crooked trees stretching out into the void. And then the engine died. The lights flickered one last time and went out completely. Silence. Total blackness. Someone screamed. The conductor tried to relight the incense, but the flame wouldn't catch. And then came the footsteps. Wet. Slow. Dragging across the floor. No one ever found the passengers. 2 days later, the bus was discovered in a maintenance yard, miles from its intended route. The fuel tank was full, the ignition intact, but no sign of the conductor. Only the driver, curled up in the back, mumbling the same sentence over and over. "They got off before we did, but we were never supposed to be on that bus." I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video and want to listen to more true horror stories from Asia, feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications. I upload at least 3 times a week. Wish you all the best.